We negate. Contention 1 is the power vacuum. Iran has hegemonic and imperial ambitions that would be emboldened if the U.S. pulls its military out of the region. Cropsey and Ruffhead in 2019 explained that eliminating U.S. naval dominance would upend the current balance of power with severe consequences. The pursuit of this mantle in the 21st century has only one true aspirational contender, Iran. And Iran's strategy involves expanding its influence through proxies supported by well-placed special operations forces in an attempt to wear down Saudi and Israeli strength. Iran is seeking to export its revolutionary ideology across the Middle East. As Gardner in 2019 explains, it's starting with Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Republic has been seeking to export its revolutionary ideology and expand its influence beyond its borders ever since the return of Ayatollah Khomeini to Iran in 1979. Ruffhead continues that Israel and Saudi Arabia are two main challengers to Iran's ambitions. The Israeli Defense Forces are the only military in the region of Western quality and proficiency, and Saudi Arabia's kingdom has been remarkably adept at cultivating support. The House of Saud remains custodian of Islam's two holy cities, Mecca and Medina, a position of great religious and political importance. War will break out as the countries clash to fill the power vacuum that the U.S. leaves behind. Cropsey and Ruffhead in 2019 conclude that in the event of U.S. withdrawal from the region, a long-term regional war between Tehran and Saudi Arabia would cause widespread bloodshed. Iran and Saudi Arabia would be likely to attempt nuclear breakout. An increasingly fractured and war-ravaged Middle East would spawn more jihadist organizations with the West as their primary target. Absent a reliable U.S. presence, Saudi Arabia and perhaps even Israel would increasingly turn to Russia and China as great power guarantors. Contention 2 is Saudi Arabia. Subpoint A is a Saudi civil war. Losing security commitments would be a political disaster for the Saudi royal family. Locke in 2018 finds that publicly the Saudi royal family and government have shown a united front, but if they start seeing the U.S. security relationship disintegrating, they are going to say that the young man is chipping away at the bedrock of their stability and leaving them vulnerable, which is a serious indictment. MBS has no domestic legitimacy, so without U.S. external support, he will cease to rule. Harb in 2019 continues that American support is vital for bin Salman to maintain his rule. MBS has no popular legitimacy. He's not elected. He doesn't represent the public. He lacks that legitimacy, and he knows that very well. So for this kind of ruler to exist, he needs to have backing from outside. The situation is ripe for conflict with many powerful actors in Saudi Arabia. Locke furthers that we certainly know MBS has alienated a number of important social actors, including large swaths of the business community and religious community, and they can prove to be the difference maker in whether or not bin Salman remains. A succession battle leads to a civil war, as Doran and Badran in 2018 conclude that Prince Mohammed's enemies inside and outside the kingdom are numerous. In a violent succession battle, horrific forces would be unleashed. Outside actors such as Iran and Russia would rush in. The United States would find itself embroiled in another civil war as in Syria. In either scenario, Iran would rejoice. Subpoint B is nuclearization. Knights writes in 2018 that the U.S.-Saudi relationship is built on a simple premise. Washington provides physical security for the Saudi state. Troop pullout substantially damages our security commitments. Saab in 2018 confirms that if the U.S. pulls out, the relationship with Saudi Arabia will rapidly deteriorate. The Saudis see the U.S. military presence in Bahrain as an integral part of their security. Significantly decreasing security commitments with Saudi Arabia could cause them to proliferate. Brown in 2017 explains that discussion has increased within Saudi Arabia about nuclear weapons. Although proliferation is currently a fringe idea for most U.S. allies, a significant retrenchment in U.S. security commitments would make these ideas viable, particularly for states facing highly acute threats. The impact is war. As the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations finds in 2008, Israel would likely detect the Saudi nuclear activity. Israel might strike a small number of Saudi targets in order to eliminate the program in its infancy. The Israelis would likely view it as an existential threat, and such an Israeli attack would represent one of the greatest offenses to Muslims in history and would incite a region-wide conflict between the Arab states and Israel.
Can everyone hear me all right? Yeah. Alrighty. Then Highland affirms our sole contention is restoring the balance. U.S. military presence has shattered the Gulf. Surgeon of West Point in 2019 reports that intervention of the military and presence of our troops has fragmented the once stable Gulf by empowering separatists and hindering regional cooperation. There are two ways that reducing military presence resolves this internal fracturing. First is by easing rogue actors. The United States military presence is seen as a threat to its enemies in the Gulf. Jones of The Atlantic in 2011 writes that U.S. military presence in the Gulf has surrounded the Iranian military, putting them under a constant threat. threat. This approach has strengthened hardliners and convinced them that the best path to self-preservation is through defiance, militarism, and a pursuit of dangerous ties with extremist groups, which is why Jones concludes that the conflict could easily spin out of control. This is confirmed by Rezai in the Center for Middle East Strategic Studies in 2015, who finds that Iranian military strategy is one of defensive realism, where Iran uses a reactionary approach to achieve balance in the region against United States interests, which have been destabilizing. This is why Iran constantly flares up internal conflicts in response to U.S. action. Second is by removing the security guarantee. The United States not only emboldens its enemies to stir up conflicts, but also inspires its allies to act out. Jones warrants that U.S. policymakers refuse to confront Gulf states on their actions due to the continued belief that we need to keep military presence in the region. As a result, our presence emboldens states like Saudi Arabia and Bahrain to work in counterproductive ways, cracking down on local democratic movements while falsely claiming Iranian meddling. Glazer of the National Interest in 2014 furthers that U.S. military presence in countries like Qatar created a level of tolerance for host governments, financial support of radical extremist groups. Glazer furthers that Gulf states receive tangible benefits from their alliance with the U.S. in the form of a security guarantee, which they believe the U.S. will come to their defense from adversaries, promoting counterproductive strategies to peace. As a result, Benson of UChicago in 2011 writes that unconditional alliances increase the chance of conflict by 249%. The only way to resolve this is to reduce our footprint in the Gulf. It is for these two reasons that Octave of the Middle East Policy Council in 2011 writes that a reduced U.S. military footprint in the region would allow Iran and Gulf states to pursue regional cooperation with each other, as the United States' external presence has been the driving destabilizing factor. This shift to regional cooperation is key, as Valesco of UCF in 2013 quantifies that regional actors are roughly 3.5 times more likely to craft an agreement that ceases hostilities for at least 5 years compared to when external actors are involved. There are two impacts. The first is preventing genocide. The conflict in Yemen has escalated. Bachman of The Conversation in 2018 writes that more than 22 million people are in need of humanitarian aid, and the destruction brought by the conflict in the region has amounted to genocide. By facilitating a shift away from the U.S., matters between the Iranian-backed Houthis and the Saudi-led coalition would be resolved. Hamadin of the King's College in 2013 writes that American presence in the Gulf led to severe polarization of positions and ended cooperation between regional actors. Fortunately, Parsi of Foreign Policy in 2020 confirms that once the Saudi government realized that U.S. military was no longer at their disposal, there was an 80% reduction in Saudi-led airstrikes. Roth of the Human Rights Watch in 2018 terminalizes that reducing airstrikes is key to ending the genocide, as they have taken out homes, schools, health facilities, and innocent civilians. The second impact is U.S.-Iran war. U.S. military presence creates an escalating spiral of aggression that threatens miscalculation in war with Iran. Malecki in 2014 confirms that American military actions are interpreted as the most aggressive. As a consequence, military skirmishes result in a spiral model where when conflicts arise, both actors escalate to prevent one from getting the upper hand. The risk of such miscalculation is higher now than ever before, as Al Jazeera just a few months ago reported that Iran shot down a Ukrainian plane thinking it was U.S. military personnel. Overall, Avery from the University of Copenhagen in 2013 concludes that a war with Iran would escalate, entirely destabilizing the Middle East, drawing in global powers like Russia and China, resulting in the use of nuclear weapons and inevitably causing extinction. Thus, we affirm.
So, your first link says that the U.S. presence has strengthened and given more power to hardliners. So, how are the post-AF, how are the hardliners removed from power?
It's not that they're removed from power, it's their goals are delegitimized. The hardliners' goals are based all around the idea that the U.S. is this big, bad military presence that wants to take out Iran.
Delegitimized to who? Like, if the hardliners are the ones that are ruling the country, why does why does it matter whether or not they're delegitimized?
They don't run the whole country. Like, they don't have completely, unilateral control. If they did, they could go attack Saudi Arabia. Like they could, launch offensive and start a war right now. They have some power.
So hardliners definitely are in control of the Iranian.
They have some control.
That's what your contention says, right? Your contention says that the reason Iran is aggressive is because hardliners are at the helm. Hardliners aren't people who are just automatically going to start a war with Saudi Arabia. They're just people that want to be expansionists, right? So my question is, if they're the ones ruling the government, then how are they taken out of power, or why does the delegitimization matter?
Right, so the delegitimization matters so that they can't go and use their power to, start a war, right? If their concerns... The way that they right, so the Jones evidence that we talk about, it talks about how hardliners and their position on starting a war is strengthened by U.S. military presence because it gives people something to worry about, that the U.S. is there, that imminent threat. Once that's away, the hardliners have nothing to point at as a scapegoat, I guess you could say, that gives them a reason to go to war.
Why,
mind if I get a
question? Something to point at if they're the ones in charge of the whole operation? Like they're the ones in
Right,
charge of
but-
the whole
but
operation. Who's going to tell them?
They have nothing to go to war over though. That's the point. Do you mind if I get a question?
Hardliners are always going to want to go to war and be expansionists.
That's fine, but they've been using the U.S. as a reason to go to war, and they won't have that. So let's start off on your contention one about this power vacuum. At the bottom, you say Russia and China are going to fill in, right?
Sure.
So how long does that take?
I'm not sure.
All right, and then
That's the question.
just one more follow-up on that. If Russia and China fill in, does that stop like the Israel or the Iranian spread of influence?
Does it stop the Iranian spread of influence? Probably not.
No. Okay, sick.
Why?
So let's talk about Yemen.
Okay.
So given that the United States is pretty much solely responsible for the arms that Saudi Arabia's military is buying, and those don't go away post-AF, why does Saudi Arabia have any incentive to back down in Yemen, given that
Those
the
arms aren't
main
sufficient to
support that they
protect
have from the
themselves.
U.S. is via arms sales rather than military presence?
Right, so we would argue that those arms sales aren't enough to allow Saudi Arabia complete like impunity, right? So like the link that we give you about security guarantee, the only reason that Saudi Arabia or Qatar or any of these U.S. allies can go and do these things is because they know they're not going to face retaliation if there's ever like a
Retaliation
response.
from who? Like what do they think is going to happen? It's just the Houthi rebels.
I mean, like you talk about like MBS, like worried about like uprising and stuff like that. Like the U.S. is there to protect him and keep MBS like.
The U.S. is not there to protect MBS from a civil war. That's what you're talking about. But okay, that's
We'll talk about that.
Start on Iran. 3 responses. First, turn the argument against them. Crawford 19 from Arcus explains that Iran's ideology is to export their Shia ideology onto their neighbors who are all Sunni. This means even absent America, Iran still has a massive ideological incentive to continue being expansionist and violent against their neighbors. Secondly, Iran will never moderate thanks to hardliners. Edelman 20 explains that led by Khomeini, true believers retain control of the government and have resisted reformist efforts and have undermined all democracy. The Islamic Republic will never evolve into a responsible stakeholder. It will never permit opposition to take place. The revolutionaries will never give up on the revolution. They don't need a new scapegoat because they don't need to convince anyone they've seized the entire democratic process. But third, even absent American influence, Iranian hardliners will still want to expand. As Takea 2020 explains, that hardliners view their role in Syria, Yemen, and Lebanon as success stories for the regime's power, so they have no reason to disrupt their strategy. All these function as turns on Iran because Tisdall explains that if Iran is always going to be expansionist, it's key that America have military presence and key choke points to prevent Iran from going to war with allies, and B, risk of deterrence still applies if Iran is still expansionist. On the next argument about allied lash-out, first turn the argument against them. The U.S. can reassure Arab states and leverage them into backing down. Gerald 2013 explains that military presence gives America tremendous leverage to coerce Arab states into being less expansionist. But then secondly, turn the argument again. America pressures Saudi Arabia to limit civilian casualties, for example. As such, Rogan 2018 finds that if the U.S. pulls its functional support for the Saudi alliance, the Saudis will lose all the inhibitions about accurate targeting. Those developments will be disastrous for civilians. Note they can't go for impacts off of any other alliance in the region. The specific reason is because of the fact that they don't read any sort of impact scenario that links to any other alliance. So the Saudis are the leaders of the Yemeni coalition, and Qatar the UAE already pulled out of the war. So it has to be tethered to Saudi. On regional cooperation, note this is the internal link into their solvency of literally anything. Several turns. First, absent American pressure, regional states cannot do diplomacy on their own. Jan at the University of Pennsylvania writes in 2020 that given the deep-rooted ideological and political divisions between key players in the region, it is difficult to envision new Islamic bloc creating harmony. Discord and division have afflicted the Muslim world. Second turn, if America demilitarizes the Gulf, countries are forced to remilitarize themselves, sparking an arms race. Averill 2019 explains that an abrupt U.S. withdrawal would most likely spur arms race of conventional forces. Sorry, just zoom it up 1 second. It spurs an arms race of conventional forces. That causes war and also severs the link into diplomacy. Stoll 2017 explains that if states are involved in a mutual arms buildup, this increases the risk of war by 180%. Third, U.S. involvement is the prerequisite to regional alliances. Aguirre 19 explains that the American presence in the region was extremely important to the stability of the GCC. It protected them from larger foreign powers and created opportunities for economic growth within their countries. Specifically on the Yemen scenario. First, turn the argument. The Saudis won't turn to peace if they lose their American security partners. They'll just feel insecure and lash out more within Iranian-backed Houthi rebels on their border. This is proven in the status quo because they are backing down thanks to American pressure. Hubbard 2020 explains that Saudi Arabia announced the kingdom and its allies would observe a ceasefire in Yemen, a move that could pave the way for ending a conflict. It is the biggest step forward in the history of the conflict. Making Saudi Arabia insecure by pulling out would ultimately only jeopardize this. But third, turn it again. They embolden the Houthi rebels because Knights et al. In 2019 explains that withdrawing U.S. support will embolden the Houthis and their Iranian supporters, making them less likely to accept an agreement as they feel they have already won. Now on the U.S.-Iran scenario. First, regional war is a prerequisite. We say that the U.S. gets pulled in through redeployment since we still have alliances in the region. It only, basically, we are the prerequisite into U.S.-Iran war, because if regional war happens, America has to get re-involved. But then secondly, the U.S. won't escalate. Two warrants. A, Agozi 2020 explains that President Trump is preoccupied with the problems of coronavirus and won't harm Iran in its current vulnerable state, who also won't escalate. But B, Hassan in 2020 explains the U.S. military leadership itself has been wary of a sharp military escalation. They say miscalc happens, but insofar as we're not trying to escalate in the first place, there's no risk of miscalc. Secondly, they don't have any time frame. The U.S. and Iran have been at the brink of war for years and years. They don't prove what changes now. But fourth, the affirmative emboldens Iran and forces America to escalate. As Tony 2019 explains, that actions elicit declarations that America doesn't want to escalate. If America backs down, Iran will become more audacious and attack further facilities. We say that pulls the U.S. into the region through another war, through redeployments.
Everyone's good? Yeah? Okay. Start off on rogue actors. The first response they make is from Crawford that says that Iran will export to expand their Shia influence. But the problem is Young 19 finds that the reason that Iran doesn't have the capacity to actually expand into the Gulf states is because there's no Shia presence in the region, which means that all of their expansion would have no diminishing returns. The next two responses, you can group them as hardliners. Their own hardliners' evidence says that American dominance is the imperative behind why there is hardliner presence. This is empirically proven, which is why NBC in 2019 finds that when Saudi Arabia pushed for negotiations with Iran, Iran started to push back, and they said that they would fight every last American to the death, which is why pulling U.S. presence out of the region, you can extend the Jones evidence here, because Jones explicitly says that the U.S., that the reason that there was a problem with Iranian negotiations with the Gulf states is because the Gulf states want to negotiate, but Iran sees the U.S. military backing the Gulf as defiance, which means that they believe the only way to self-preservation is through militarism. The next thing they talk about is on Saudi Arabia. The first thing they say is about how U.S. reassurance is going to use leverage, and this is linked into their second turn as well, but decreasing casualties. The problem is they don't prove empiric analysis of how the U.S. has used their leverage to actually decrease casualties. These are just an analysis with like hypotheticals. We would say from the Glacier evidence that the U.S. has continued to give things like a tactic security guarantee to countries like Qatar that's funnel money into groups that are extremists, and the Benson evidence says that with these alliances increase the risk of conflict by 249%. All dropped evidence. Then on the internal link, the first response that they make is that the U.S. If the U.S. doesn't pressure them, then there's no chance of there being any kind of negotiations. Two problems. First, Hamad 13 finds that in the 90s, before the U.S. even intervened, there was already trust building going on, and Saudi and Iran were able to overlook their differences, which proves empirically they're able to do it. But second, the Parsi evidence says that Saudi Arabia and Iran were willing on negotiating, but the U.S. strikes Soleimani, which is why it caused escalation to happen again. The next response is that the Gulf is going to remilitarize without the U.S., but the Parsi evidence also responds back to this. Parsi says that a lot of realist assumptions were hinged on the fact that the Saudi Arabia was going to militarize and things like that, but it didn't happen. In fact, they pushed for negotiations, and the last response is that the U.S. is a prerequisite, but what we would argue is that the Gulf cooperation is going to be a lot more stable without the U.S. This comes from the Valesco evidence that they also dropped, which says that regional actors are 3.5 times more likely to come to cooperation after 5 years. This is empirically proven through the negotiations that were happening in the 90s on the Yemen scenario. You can bite the defense on the worst scenario. We're going for Yemen. The two responses they make is first from Hubbard that says that there is a peace deal happening right now. This doesn't respond to the Valesco evidence, which is that these peace deals are always going to be short term. The only risk of having long-term solvency is through regional cooperation for 5 years. But then they say that Houthis are going to get emboldened. That is not true. You would say that the negotiation happens between Saudi Arabia and Iran. These are the two groups that are backing the Houthis and the Saudi-led coalition. As long as they negotiate, the tensions go down. Go to their case. Their first contention talks about the power vacuum. A lot of responses. First, you can cross-apply the Young evidence, which says that Iran won't expand because there's no Shia influence in the Gulf, which means that it would be a high-cost, low-return situation. That's why they haven't done it in the past. Next, they talk about how Russia and China are going to fill in, but the problem is that nukes check back for a great power escalation in the Gulf. There are two implications. The first is that their argument is non-unique because we're already caught in a bunch of proxy wars. No reason that escalation has happened with all these countries. But second, it delinks their arguments because there are security institutions in place like the United Nations that check back for power wars, and there's a reason why we haven't had a great power war, even though we've pulled military presence out in other countries. Go to their second contention talking about Saudi Arabia. Their first subpoint is about the civil war happening. Two responses here. The first one comes from Debusman 18, who finds that the MBS is not an illegitimate leader because he has 90% approval ratings from younger populations, and the warrant for this comes from the CSIS in 2018, who writes that MBS has adopted a liberal interpretation of Islam, which allows for more democracy and things like that, which younger populations like. This is empirically proven through things like the Arab Spring. We would say that the Arab Spring is a really good example to counter their argument, because one, we would say either the Arab Spring proves that their argument is non-unique because civil conflicts are always going to happen, or B, it proves that liberal interpretations like MBS's are going to prevent things like those conflicts because he always gets support for younger populations. The second response comes from Ghosh 18, who finds that empirically their argument is untrue about secession, because empirically when there were times of revolution inside of Saudi Arabia, secession was still stable. I urge you to call for the evidence. Is super good on this. Then on their subpoint B about nuclearization, there's a massive turn here because Lockheed 19 finds that after whistleblower reports Trump has been helping Saudi Arabia to build a nuclear bomb. The implication is twofold. The first one is that it's non-unique because the U.S. can just help them do it anyways. You don't need need to have them do it themselves, but second, it's a turn because if the U.S. withdraws, it fractures their relationship with Saudi Arabia to the point where they don't trust them anymore and they don't build nukes anymore.
All right, you ready for cross?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about your Yemen scenario.
Yeah.
So your argument is that absent America, countries are going to come together and they're going to be able to solve the problem.
Yeah.
So you say that Saudi Arabia and Iran will do diplomacy behind the scenes, and that is why the Houthis don't matter. So do you not think that the Houthis have their own autonomous capability to continue fighting, even if Iran ceases support temporarily?
You make the exact same argument. Your Hubbard evidence says that the ceasefires were brokered by the actors that are backing the internal conflict. That's the exact same thing.
No, it also says the Houthis were in it and agreed to it. It's
right,
not
exactly.
The same
which just proves that
it's
the Houthis.
It's very absurd to say the Houthis just don't matter.
Well, no, the thing is,
they are the ones doing the fighting.
You just said it yourself. That just proves the Houthis are willing to negotiate. The question is, the negotiator needs to be effective. We say that regional negotiators do a lot better than the U.S. as an external negotiator, which is why all the ceasefires that we've had for the last couple of years are short-term. Can I ask you a question?
I understand that. I was talking about a specific front line you made, but sure.
Yeah, sure. So let's talk about Saudi Arabia, right? So on nuclearization, what incentive does Saudi Arabia have to launch a first strike if they know that it would cause, you say that MBS isn't self-destructive. He wants to stay in power. So what incentive does he have to launch a first strike if he knows that it would cause his regime to fall?
So that was the problem with your rebuttal answer. You misunderstood the impact scenario. Saudi doesn't strike first, Israel strikes first. Can I have a question?
Sure.
Let's talk about your first argument about easing rogue actors.
Yeah.
So you say that there is no Shia presence within the Middle East that Iran could use to expand.
There is a very
if
low
that's true,
Shia
why
presence.
is Iran funding multiple militias in Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen?
Yeah, they're funding militias. There's a difference between Iran expanding their influence and trying to gain control over regions, which is what your scenario is, and them funneling money to militias to cause conflict. Our argument is that because
there's militias
argument,
are a subset of Iranian expansion.
Right, exactly. But the problem
There's no question about that. That's
exactly.
How they expand
but the reason why that expansion that you talk about, they're funneling money to militias, has not been effective is because the presence of Shias is super low across the Gulf. Our evidence even says that the reason Iran doesn't aggressively push for expansion is because they know it would be a high cost, low return scenario. Could I ask you a question?
Sure.
Let's talk about let's talk about this great power war, right? So.
You also misunderstand that scenario. Just to clarify, the impact scenario is not nuclear armed adversaries going to war. It's not America, China, Russia. It's a great power war of the regional powers. So it's Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iran. Yeah,
sure, but they're all backed by external actors, right? That's what your evidence even says. Sure. So if they're backed, though,
every country is.
Yeah, sure, exactly. So external actors always influence regional actors' decisions, right? That's what's happening right now. Countries like Russia influence Iran.
To a degree.
Sure, exactly. So then, if external actors know that regional conflict would be bad, why would they act as a check on that as well?
Internal actors also know regional conflict is bad. The question is, do the harms of not escalating outweigh the harms of escalating? And we say that if Iran becomes hyper-aggressive, they start funding actual attacks on Saudi Arabia with increasing frequency. That makes the probability of an actual conflict between the two very high.
Cool.
How much time do we have left in cross? I think I messed up.
We're over by 6 for me, so.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to run just 10 or 15 more seconds of prep. We're going for nuclearization. Extend the length. The Ninth evidence says that the U.S.-Saudi relationship is reliant on the security guarantee, which is why Brown says that Saudi Arabia will feel insecure about their safety and proliferate or try to build nuclear weapons if they see a declining U.S. security guarantee. The Senate evidence says that Israel sees this as an existential threat. Israel strikes the nuclear facilities even before they make nuclear weapons, which is seen as the biggest assault on Muslims in literally world history, which incites the regional conflict between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Let's look at their first response. They read a turn saying that Trump is helping Saudi Arabia build a bomb. 4 responses. 1, the trade that's happening right now is trade. That is not military presence. That evidence says that it is companies transferring information, not the U.S. government. That doesn't go away. Second, we would say, if anything, it's more likely that Trump helps them build a bomb even more because he's trying to make up for the lack of the security guarantee when you affirm. Third, Christopher, that evidence says that the nuclear experts say that these transfers are routine and literally don't raise any concern. And fourth, they're only transferring reactors. Canada and Mexico also have nuclear reactors. It's not like they're really giving them the capability to build a bomb. Next, we say that backers of Saudi Arabia and Israel will never let them go to conflict. They dropped the Senate evidence which said Israel sees Saudi Arabia as literally an existential threat, which means that they are likely to look past the backers because they think that Saudi Arabia is going to attack them and pressure them diplomatically. Here's how you weigh this. We would say that a direct regional war between two regional actors outweighs proxy conflicts in Yemen for two reasons. One, allies are drawn in, so the conflict is much bigger. And two, we would say that instability, it's a prerequisite because widespread instability in the region perpetuates proxy wars, so we are a prerequisite. Let's go to their case. Several big problems. On the first link, two reasons why Iran's always going to expand. First is the Gardner evidence that says it's always trying to expand its Shia ideology. They respond with Young by saying that there's no Shia presence in the region. It's literally not true. Iran is funding tons of militias and tons of proxy conflicts all over the place. Also, it's about converting Sunni Muslims into Shia Muslims. Anyways, it doesn't matter what the Shia presence is. Next, they drop this. They drop the second turn on their first link. It says that U.S. pulling out emboldens hardliners because they see it as an anti-imperial success story, which gives them more ground to keep up. The reason that that's a turn is because the Tisdall evidence says that the U.S. military presence key choke points around the Persian Gulf, such as the Strait of Hormuz, prevents that expansion, which means that Iran expands less or expands more when you affirm. That's two distinct warrants as to why Iran will always be expansionist. On the security guarantee argument, extend the really mishandled second turn from Rogan that said the U.S. pressure allows for decreasing civilian casualties in Yemen, which directly turns their impact. They respond by saying there's no empirics. The U.S. was able to pressure Saudi Arabia into not invading Qatar. There definitely are empirics. But second, the Rogan evidence literally is empirics. The Rogan evidence concludes that because of U.S. pressure, that means that Saudi Arabia is trying more and more to not kill civilians. Our evidence is empirics. I don't know what they're talking about. At that point, we turn the link into civilian deaths in Yemen. They make the conflict worse. Let's extend the arms race turn. We tell you that countries feel insecure, so they proliferate conventional arms. The stool evidence says that leads to a 180% increase in the probability of armed conflict. They extend Parsi by saying that Saudi Arabia didn't militarize. That's probably Saudi Arabia, and they didn't militarize because they already have U.S. weapons. That doesn't count for literally every single other country in the Gulf state that isn't relying on a ton of U.S. arms sales. Those are the ones that proliferate weapons, and that's an independent link in the conflict, interregional conflict, and that's why I vote for us.
Start off in their argument about rapid nuclearization. They read four responses about how this is routine trades and all this stuff. The problem is that all four of their responses don't interact with the non-unique that Arun outputs from Lockheed in 19. It says that regardless in either world, Saudi Arabia is still going to be able to build up a nuke, which means that regardless, Israel still has that incentive to first strike. At that point, it's non-unique. Even if it's not a turn, it's not offense for us. It still causes the first strike. There's no offense off of that. That's a really big non-unique. It's terminal defense on their case. There's no reason that Israel doesn't strike in their role but does strike in ours. There's actually no offense. It's totally non-unique. Then let's go to our case. On the top level, they extend two responses. They talk about how Iran is constantly trying, and because of that, they're trying to convert Muslims over. There's a big problem with this, though. Their great power war scenario doesn't ever actually happen. That's because the only reason they're feeding proxies is in order to stop U.S. presence. This is confirmed by two pieces of evidence. Not only the Young in 19 evidence, which explicitly says it, but on top of it, their own author says specifically, the card that they sent us says that Iran is only trying to fight U.S. influence. That's really big because we would argue these proxy funding goes away if the U.S. stops funding it. The other thing they say is they feel victory over the United States and over this imperialism. Remember, their author already agreed that the only reason they need to do this is to fight off U.S. presence. Once that's gone, that gives us access to the Jones and 11 evidence. It's really explicit in saying that hardliners are strictly against Americans, which is why, quote for quote, the Saudi Arabian negotiator said that they would fight Americans, fight to the last American, not to Saudi Arabia, which is why you can extend the Jones evidence and realize that once the United States is out, Iran is willing to come to the table. The other thing they say on the security guarantee is they say that Saudi Arabia didn't invade Qatar and that there would be more civilian casualties. The problem is they missed the NBC in 2019 evidence that Arunov extends here. It says that Saudi Arabia is already ready to sign a peace deal. So at the point where Iran is also ready to sign a peace deal, there's no more conflict in Yemen. There's no more civilian casualties at all. At the point where we solve for impact, we get access to our case. There's no turn there. That gives us access to the internal link. The Octa and 11 evidence is really good. It says that the U.S. being there explicitly is stopping negotiations, and the Velasco and 13 evidence says that regional actors are 3.5 times more likely to craft an agreement that lasts more than 5 years. The Velasco evidence is going to be really critical in your impact weighing, but let's finish up with the impact. The Bachman and 18 evidence you can extend says that 22 million people right now in the status quo are in dire need. They extend this idea that it's just the Saudi military that didn't proliferate. That's our whole link scenario. Once we take out Saudi Arabia's proliferation, Iran comes to the table because they no longer have U.S. backing. Finish with some impact weighing on risk of solvency. Remember, right now in the status quo, the Gulf is basically on fire with 22 million people in Yemen in dire need. We would argue that a risk of solvency is far better because they give you no actual way to solve for the conflict. At best, in their world, you still leave 22 million Yemeni civilians in dire need. We would argue that you can vote on a risk of solvency, but also the Velasco and 13 evidence. Remember, it says that you are more more likely, 3.5 times more likely to craft an agreement that lasts more than 5 years. Vote for us on time frame as well. Valesco is explicit in saying that regional actors getting the United States out crafts long-term solvency. That's something that they don't give you, thus affirm.
Turn it up.
Why don't we have long-term solvency? What's the time frame issue? I don't understand.
Oh yeah, it's about the Hubbard evidence, which was in rebuttal. It says that you guys said that there were a bunch of ceasefires happening, and our analysis that those are short term, which wasn't mentioned in summary. So our weighing is that we achieve long term negotiation, and the ceasefires are short term.
You just weighed against a non-unique. That was a non-unique.
Are you weighing against our response?
We weigh against the status quo. The status quo is peace deals are happening through ceasefires, which are short term. Our argument is that the affirmative produces long term solvency.
Weighing against our case.
You're not weighing against our case. You're weighing against a response that we didn't go for.
Right, because we read non-uniques on your case, which is what we're going to go for. We say that risk of solvency on this conflict is better because it's more probable. That's why.
Let's talk about that response. Right?
Yeah, sure.
So far as all of the nuclear experts conclude that the transferring that is happening right now as nothing, it will not raise concern and does not give Saudi Arabia the ability to build nuclear weapons, why does that not respond to the non-unique?
Because your argument is that Israel's going to strike if they see Saudi Arabia building a nuclear weapon, which is what's happening. Right now.
Don't prove, your non-unique, right, is that because the U.S. is transferring this information, they're going to hold it either way, right? But how does the fact that this transfer doesn't do anything not answer the non-unique that says that it is doing something?
What? Your argument is about nuclearization. You say that they build nukes if the U.S. pulls out. We say they're building nukes now.
No. You said they were non-responsive.
Yeah, exactly, because it's happening right now. Because in fact, the first
evidence does not say it's happening right now.
It says that they're. It says that they're
3 and 4 say that it is not happening right now.
The first thing you even said was that they're giving the info right now. You agree that it's happening right now.
Okay, but what's happening right now is they're giving info from companies about how to operate nuclear reactors. Mexico has nuclear reactors. Canada has nuclear reactors. That doesn't mean they're developing nukes.
The evidence says verbatim, the U.S. is now clearing a path for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to build a nuclear bomb.
Right.
So it's layers of responses to take you out on every single layer of the turn. The first response says that even if you believe that the information is helping them build a nuclear bomb, that information is going to go either way. But the third and fourth response says that doesn't matter because the information isn't helping them do anything, right? Which is what the evidence says. Yeah. It's either our own evidence or your evidence says that these transfers are literally routine and are doing nothing to help them build nuclear weapons.
Right. Well, then
I don't know why that means that it's all of a sudden non-unique and they're going to get nuclear weapons.
Right. So your layered response to the turn, we agree, but the evidence is explicit. Like Arunab said, verbatim says they're clearing a path for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to build a nuclear bomb. Yeah. There's no question about that.
Yeah. Our evidence is also very specific.
Right.
And it's definitely much more believable, right? Why the hell would the U.S. give Saudi Arabia the capability to build a nuclear weapon? That's really stupid.
Because Trump is Trump is literally nuke crazy.
Says, wait, sorry, are you talking? Sorry?
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Is that? Oh, we are. Okay, never mind then.
Yeah, that's fine.
Ned explains that if America withdraws all its presence from Saudi Arabia loses all of its access to security. The easiest route for it to then securitize itself against threat is to develop nuclear weapons. But Israel, according to the conceded SCFR evidence explains, Israel views that as an existential threat, it preemptively strikes Saudi Arabia, which causes a massive regional war which kills millions. Then they extend one response. They just extend their same response to say all the front lines don't apply and don't explain why they don't apply. The one front line we need to extend, which is dropped, is the Christopher evidence explaining that according to experts, the only things that we're selling is routine things that companies have. Also, they can't enrich it because the thing that is being the secrets being traded are corporate secrets. You really can't use them to build a nuclear weapon. So no, they are not nuclearizing now. But then secondly, the only thing they say is that Saudi Arabia can build a nuclear weapon. Even if that's true, our link says they'll choose not to build a nuclear weapon unless they have to. So even in a worst case scenario, they're still non-responsive. At that point, then they say that Iran somehow solved nuclearization.
All this just doesn't respond to the evidence that's explicit.
On the way, it's all conceded. Firstly, this war is bigger. You solve it first because there's direct conflict and allies get sucked in. Second, it's a prerequisite. This war spirals into funding more proxy wars. If we were risk of offense here, we win the round. They say risk of solvency that was weighing against a turn. It also doesn't really make any sense. Let's go on to their case. as an observation, they need to win both their links to win any risk of offense, because if either Iran or Saudi Arabia doesn't start negotiating in their world, they don't access Yemen's sovereignty. Let's start by extending a turn. They cold drop in summary. We say that if we withdraw, hardliners are emboldened and start to expand more. The only thing they say is that the only reason Iran ever expands is because of the U.S. Independently, if they see a victory, they expand more, which is why you don't get solvency in their world. The next thing you extend is the turn on security guarantee, where we say the U.S. restrains Saudi Arabia and makes them come to the table and do less of the casualties. He just says, well, we could have done an agreement later, yeah, but we didn't, so we need to decrease the casualties. The last thing you extend is the arms race turn. Cold drop. We explain that if you demilitarize, countries need to remilitarize. That causes massive arms race, which causes a 180% increase in the risk of conflict. This is cold drop, and it severs the link to diplomacy. If countries are militarized, they won't trust each other enough to come to the table.
Their extension about nuclearization is still non-interactive with our non-unique. It literally had two ships floating in the past, and they don't actually give you the interactive analysis, so I'll do it for you. They say that experts say that we are selling, but our non-unique even takes this into account and says that they are building a bomb right now. That just takes into account, even if there's routine checks going on, there's routine sales going on, that is still what's developing the nuclear weapon. They say that Saudi Arabia will choose not to do it, but our evidence says that they are doing it right now, which just proves that if Israel is going to really view that as an existential threat, they would do it anyways. Literally, it says that the U.S. is clearing the path for them to build the bomb right now. That is the cleanest non-unique. There is no access to their impact scenario talking about how there's going to be a great power war because Saudi Arabia is already doing it, which means that the implication is twofold. One, they are already going to cause the war to happen, or two, Israel doesn't see this as an existential threat and there's no probability on their link scenario. But then go to our case. They keep on extending these terms talking about how there was going to be hardliners. Well, we give you the very clean analysis from James that says that hardliners are only motivated by the U.S.'s dominance, and their own author concedes this as well on the term that they read, and they extend the analysis that talks about how this observation that we have to win both links. Jackson literally frontlines the second response on security guarantee from the NBC evidence that says that Saudi Arabia is pushing for negotiations right now, and the only reason that those negotiations didn't work is because Iran, quote for quote, wanted to fight every last American. That is the cleanest piece of evidence in the round that gives you access towards our internal link analysis, talking about Octave that says that you have to decrease conflicts by pulling the external influence out of the region, and Valesco, which says that there's a 3.5 times increase in the likelihood that you craft an agreement that lasts for 5 years. They extend this argument talking about militarization, but Jackson frontlines this also because our response is that Parsi says that Saudi Arabia didn't expand, and they say that that's just about Saudi Arabia. That's our link scenario. We say that Saudi Arabia is the actor that gives us access to our impact scenario. They miss this in their final focus, which means that you give us access to the weighing that we give you on the risk of solvency. Remember, at the end of the debate, there is so much defense on their link that their front lines don't interact with until final focus. But we would say that our impact scenario and our link scenario is a lot more clear, which means you can extend the Bachman evidence. This is 22 million people on risk of aid right now, and it solves back for conflicts of Valesco, which says that there's a 3.5 times increase in the likelihood of an agreement that crashed for 5 years. The probability is really important here because you don't know if Saudi Arabia will, if the likelihood of nukes being developed changes in either world, but you do know that you can solve back for aid in our world.
Good round.
Good round.